The most accurate, realistic color in print film is here. New Kodacolor VRG.
The color of life.
Act 1. Kodak's Golden Age. In the late 1800s, photography was a niche art, complicated, expensive, and reserved for professionals who knew how to wrangle glass plates, chemicals, and long exposure times. That was until George Eastman came along. Eastman wasn't just a businessman, he was a visionary. His dream? Make photography simple enough for anyone to do it. And in 1888, Kodak introduced the first consumer camera with a revolutionary slogan: "You press the button, we do the rest." That wasn't just marketing, it was a promise. People could now capture memories without needing a darkroom or technical expertise. It was the beginning of a cultural revolution. Then came the Brownie camera in 1900. Compact, affordable, and built for the masses. Priced at just $1, the Brownie made photography a hobby instead of a profession. Families took it on vacations. Soldiers took it to war. Kids used it to snap blurry but unforgettable shots of summer afternoons. Kodak didn't just make cameras, they built an ecosystem. Film? Kodak. Development chemicals? Kodak. The paper your memories were printed on? Still Kodak. They controlled the entire photographic process from start to finish, turning every birthday party and family vacation into a steady revenue stream. By the 1960s, Kodak wasn't just a camera company, it was a cultural cornerstone. Kodak moments became part of the language. Their iconic yellow packaging, instantly recognizable. They held a staggering 90% of the film market in the US and were pulling in billions in profit every year. It was a beautiful system. Smooth, profitable, and, as it turned out, far too comfortable. Act 2. The digital camera invention. Rochester, New York. Summer of 1973. A 23-year-old electrical engineer named Steve Sasson steps into Kodak's research labs just a few weeks out of graduate school. At Kodak, electrical engineers were a rarity. The company was built around chemistry and mechanics, developing film, refining lenses, and crafting physical machinery. But something was shifting. As electronics started creeping into consumer devices, even Kodak saw the need to adapt, at least on paper. Sasson wasn't given a massive project. Instead, he was offered two options: work on exposure modeling for movie cameras or tinker with a new invention called a charge-coupled device, or CCD. The second choice sounded far more interesting. It wasn't even supposed to lead to anything groundbreaking. It was more of a side experiment to keep him busy. A quiet challenge in a corner lab. No pressure, no expectations. A CCD was a strange experimental chip that responded to light. It could convert patterns of light into electrical signals. In theory, it could act like film, except it wasn't film, it was electronic. An idea that, at the time, sounded more like science fiction than engineering. Sasson saw potential, not just because of the science, but because of the simplicity. The idea of capturing light directly onto an electronic surface, no film, no chemicals, no waiting, felt like a glimpse into the future. It was the kind of thing that would have made perfect sense on an episode of Star Trek. He scavenged parts from wherever he could find them. A lens from a used Super 8 movie camera, a digital converter from a voltmeter, circuit boards, batteries, wires everywhere. A playback monitor borrowed from a nearby lab. He even kept a small sign on the device that read, "Please return to Steve Sasson," because no one else knew what to call it. Most of the parts were taken unofficially, just laying around the lab, left over from other projects. There was no budget, no timeline, no meetings. It was just one young engineer chasing an idea that nobody else cared much about. The only thing guiding the project was curiosity. The goal wasn't to build a commercial product, it was to answer a question. Could a camera work without film? Sasson started wiring the CCD to a playback system, experimenting with voltage levels and bit patterns. The device needed 12 different voltages just to function correctly. A single misstep and the image would disappear entirely. The camera itself looked like something between a microwave and a lab experiment. Big, boxy, heavy. Cables ran out of every side. Nothing about it resembled what consumers would recognize as a camera. The first tests were rough. The image would sometimes flicker or collapse. A pixel out of place would ruin the entire shot. But every problem solved was another step forward. In December 1975, the device came to life. A shutter snapped at 1/20th of a second, capturing an image that took 23 seconds to save onto a cassette tape. The resolution? A jaw-dropping 0.01 megapixels, just 100 pixels by 100. The image was black and white, fuzzy, and hardly recognizable. But it worked. The first subject was a colleague sitting nearby, curious about what the engineers were up to. When the image finally popped up on the screen, it was odd. The background showed up fine. Her hair was visible, but her face? A blob, completely unrecognizable. The tones were reversed, the grays were flipped, but the geometry, the shape of the head, the shoulders, they were right, and that was enough. With a few adjustments, mainly switching around some wires, it finally rendered properly. The next image showed a human face, blocky, unclear, but undeniably human. Still, it was a photograph, a digital one. Sasson had done what no one else had, captured an image without film, without paper, without chemicals. It wasn't just a new camera, it was an entirely new way to think about photography. And no one, not even Sasson, fully realized what had just been created. Act 3. Competitors embrace digital. When Sasson first demonstrated his invention, he didn't talk much. Instead, he let the camera speak for itself. He'd walk into a room of Kodak executives, take their picture, pop the cassette into a playback unit, and wait. 30 seconds later, a blurry grayscale image appeared on a TV screen. Every time, people were stunned, and every time the questions came flooding in. But they weren't the questions one might expect. Not how does it work, or can we make it better? Instead, why would anyone want to take pictures like this? What's wrong with prints? Why would anyone want to view photos on a television? The room would fall quiet for a moment after the image appeared. Curiosity replaced almost instantly by confusion. Some executives leaned forward, squinting at the pixelated image as if it were some kind of magic trick. Others leaned back, arms crossed, skeptical and clearly uneasy. They couldn't stop staring, but they didn't like what they were seeing. This wasn't how photography was supposed to work. One executive famously asked, "Why would anyone want to look at pictures on a screen when they could hold them in their hands?" Sasson tried to explain the vision: instant capture, instant playback, no chemicals, no printing labs. But the words didn't land. Someone in the back muttered about losing the company's film sales. Another asked what would happen to Kodak's partnerships with photo stores and labs. There was talk of losing the Kodak experience. Sasson once suggested jokingly that photo stores could pivot to selling batteries instead. That didn't go over well. To Kodak's management, film wasn't just a medium, it was their entire business model. Cameras were just the start. Real money came from consumables, the film rolls, development, and printing. Every step in the process was a revenue stream. A filmless camera? That was terrifying. It wasn't just a technical threat, it was a cultural one. Kodak's identity was rooted in physical prints, in the feeling of opening a packet of freshly developed photos, in handing memories from hand to hand. The idea of disrupting that, especially from within, felt almost disloyal. So instead of pursuing it, they buried it. Kodak filed a patent in 1978 for Sasson's invention, calling it an electronic still camera. But they kept it quiet. There was no press release, no product launch, no public mention. It stayed buried in their archives. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that even acknowledging the future might accelerate its arrival. Meanwhile, the rest of the world began to move. Slowly at first. In 1981, Sony announced the Mavica, a prototype of an electronic camera. It wasn't truly digital, but it showed where the industry was headed. By the 1990s, companies like Canon, Nikon, and Olympus began releasing actual digital cameras. Kodak? They had a 10-year head start, and they did almost nothing with it. They dabbled, released a few digital models, but their efforts were half-hearted. Marketing budgets were small, features lagged behind competitors. The engineering was solid, but the leadership still clung to film. They didn't want to cannibalize a business that had made them billions. They bet on comfort instead of courage. By the time Kodak realized digital was the future, the race was already lost. Act 4. The decline. Throughout the 2000s, digital photography exploded. Camera quality soared, prices dropped, consumer demand skyrocketed. Point-and-shoot cameras were everywhere. On vacation beaches, in family gatherings, at graduations. For the first time, people didn't need to wait for film development to see their memories. Instant gratification had arrived, and consumers loved it. And Kodak, caught in the middle, trapped between two worlds, the comfort of their legacy and the threat of a digital future they themselves had helped invent. They had the tech, they had patents, they had people who saw it coming, engineers who had spent decades refining digital sensors, memory cards, image compression. Sassen's vision wasn't buried. It lived on inside the labs, in the patents, in the hardware. But what they lacked, what they had always lacked, was conviction. Internally, there were countless debates. Some engineers begged leadership to go all in on digital. They brought presentations, consumer trends, forecasts showing film's slow but steady decline. There were meetings filled with passionate arguments, engineers on one side, marketing on the other, and in the middle, executives afraid of change. Some pushed for innovation, others pushed back, arguing that film still had life left, that it wasn't dead, just aging gracefully. In boardrooms, marketing execs questioned whether consumers would ever fully embrace screens over prints. People love holding photos, they argued. Why would they want images stuck inside a device? Kodak had always seen photography as tangible, something you could touch, pin to a corkboard, frame above a mantle. Their entire business had been built around that physical experience. Film rolls, photo labs, processing chemicals, glossy paper. All of it carefully packaged in yellow and red boxes. The company was divided, and that hesitation cost them everything. By the time they stopped looking backwards, their competitors had already passed them by. By 2003, digital cameras outsold film cameras for the first time. The tipping point had arrived. Kodak's revenue started to drop. $20 billion at its peak in the 90s, down to $10 billion in 2003, $8 billion in 2008, and even lower by 2010. They had the components of success: world-class engineers, a brand people trusted, a massive global reach. But none of it mattered if they couldn't decide who they wanted to be. Their attempts to pivot were too little, too late. When Kodak finally leaned into digital, it was as if they were playing catch-up in a race they started themselves. They launched cameras, but with little marketing. They tried to emphasize photo printing kiosks, just as people were moving online. They focused on digital photo frames, just as smartphones were making them irrelevant. Digital printers, Canon and HP had already won. Inkjet technology, they were years behind. Smartphone cameras. Apple had taken over, turning every iPhone into a sleek pocket camera. By the time Kodak partnered with phone companies, the industry had moved on. They threw ideas at the wall: medical imaging, commercial printers, specialty chemicals, even licensing their name for budget digital cameras sold at drugstores. But none of it could fill the void left by film. What hurt most wasn't that they failed to innovate, it's that they once led innovation and still lost. Employees were laid off, departments were dissolved. Decades of institutional knowledge walked out the doors with severance packages. Kodak Park, once home to 30,000 workers, dwindled to just a few thousand. The cafeteria lines disappeared, entire buildings were shuttered. The hum of machines that once ran 24/7 grew quiet. Their stock, once trading at $80 a share, plummeted to under $3. Then even lower, retirement funds were wiped out. Families who had worked at Kodak for generations saw their livelihoods vanish. The fall wasn't dramatic. It was slow, painful, and avoidable. A company that had once promised, "You push the button, we do the rest," couldn't push itself to adapt. And by the time it tried, the rest of the world had moved on without them. Act 5. The Bankruptcy.
Eastman Kodak, a pioneer in photography for more than a century, has declared bankruptcy.
In January 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company cited the obvious, a decline in traditional photography. But the reality was far more bitter. They had invented the very thing that disrupted them, and they let it slip through their fingers. Desperate for cash, Kodak began selling off its most valuable assets, patents. Thousands of them. Apple, Google, Samsung, and others scooped them up for millions. In total, Kodak generated over $1 billion from licensing and selling intellectual property. It was enough to keep them afloat, but just barely. The iconic brand that once ruled photography was now a shadow of its former self. Their consumer camera business was essentially dead. What remained was a focus on commercial printing, chemical production, and niche professional services. The Kodak moment was no longer a slogan, it was a memory. Act 6, the irony. Here lies the cruel twist. Kodak didn't fail because they lacked innovation. They failed because they had too much to lose. Their dominance in film was so complete, so profitable, that the idea of disrupting it felt insane. Digital photography wasn't an external disruption, it was born inside their own labs. Steve Sasson saw it, so did other engineers. But the people in power didn't want to believe it. They focused on what digital lacked: low resolution, high cost, slow processing, without seeing what it could become. And when it finally became everything Sasson predicted, Kodak wasn't ready. Meanwhile, Canon and Nikon, with no film empires to protect, jumped in head first. They took risks, they marketed hard, they iterated fast. Today, they're still dominant in the camera market. Sasson stayed loyal to Kodak, worked there his entire career. Even as the company faltered, he kept working on digital imaging. In 2009, he retired, just 3 years before Kodak filed for bankruptcy. He didn't speak much about the digital camera outside work. It wasn't until a trip to Yellowstone with his family in 1998, watching tourists raise digital cameras toward Old Faithful, that it all hit home. "This is what I was thinking about," he told his wife, and it was happening, right in front of him. Act 7, the lessons. Kodak's story isn't just about one company's fall, it's a warning. Innovation doesn't fail because of bad ideas. It fails because of fear. Fear of change, fear of cannibalization, fear of short-term losses at the expense of long-term survival. Kodak had the tech, they had the talent, they even had the patents, but they lacked the courage to disrupt themselves. They waited, hesitated, protected a dying business model while the future marched on without them. Being first isn't enough. Sasson's invention came decades before the market was ready. But vision needs backing, it needs belief, and more than anything, it needs leadership willing to bet on the unknown. Kodak never made that bet, and when the dust settled, the irony was complete. The company that taught the world to capture memories became a cautionary tale it could never forget. Kodak invented the digital camera, buried it, told the engineer not to show it to anyone, and then watched competitors embrace the future while they clung to the past. They didn't just lose the film market, they lost digital too, all because they were too afraid to kill their own cash cow. Sometimes the hardest innovation isn't technological, it's cultural, organizational. It's having the guts to break what already works before someone else does it for you. Kodak couldn't do it, and that choice cost them everything. Enjoyed this story? Subscribe for more deep dives into the greatest tech stories ever told.